Hello, and welcome to Edupedia World. Today, we are going to cover the subject Managing Global Human Resources. Now, this is going to be the final chapter of this entire subject. Now, more managers and employers today find themselves managing people internationally. And the purpose of this chapter is to improve your effectiveness at applying your human resource knowledge and skills when global issues are involved. And the topics we'll discuss include internationalization of business, inter-country differences that affect HR, improving international assignments, and by means of selection, training, and maintaining international employees. Now, huge firms have long had extensive overseas operations. But with the globalization of the world economy, even small firms are discovering that success depends on marketing and managing overseas. Now, taking the company global triggers various management challenges, and the employers have to install all those management systems it needs to manage its overseas activities. And these management systems include organization structures, managerial controls, worldwide banking relationships, and of course the human resource management systems, which are used for recruiting, selecting, training, appraising, and compensating its workers abroad. Now, managing human resources internationally creates unique challenges. So, for example, should we staff the local offices abroad with local or US managers? How should we appraise and pay our local employees? Or how should we deal with the unions in our offices abroad? How do we identify and get the right talent and skills to where we need them? And how do we spread state of the art knowledge to our operations abroad? So, challenges like these don't just come from vast distances involved. The bigger issue is coping with the cultural, political, legal, and economic differences among countries. So, in China, for instance, unions are relatively powerful, and Europe, firing an employee could take a year or more. Right? And companies that operate within the United States generally have the luxury of dealing with a relatively limited set of economic, cultural, and legal variables. But the United States is a capitalist, competitive society. And while the US workforce reflects a multitude of cultural and ethnic backgrounds and shared values, this helps to blur the cultural differences, right? The shared values and the appreciation for democracy, these help to blur the cultural differences. Now, inter-country differences that affect the HR. So one is cultural factors, right? And countries differ widely in their cultures. In other words, in the basic values their citizens adhere to, and in how those values manifest themselves in the nation's arts, social programs, and simply the way of doing things. So, for example, in a study of about 330 managers from Hong Kong, mainland China, and the United States, the US managers tended to be most concerned with getting the job done, whereas Chinese managers were most concerned with maintaining a harmonious environment. And Hong Kong managers fell between these extremes. So, a classic study by Professor Geert Hofstede identified other international cultural differences. So, for example, Hofstede says societies differ in power distance. In other words, what this means is the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions accept and expect an unequal distribution of power. So he concluded that acceptance of such inequality was higher in some countries like Mexico than in others like Sweden. So similarly, compared to US employees, Mexican workers expected managers to keep their distance rather than to be close, and to be formal rather than informal. And in Germany, you should never arrive even a few minutes late and should address senior people formally with their titles. So such cultural differences are a two-way street. For example, in the Intel Corp booklet, things you need to know about working in the USA topics for incoming workers from abroad include sexual harassment and recognition of gay and lesbian rights. The next difference is in the economic systems, and these translate into differences in human resource management policies. So, for one thing, some countries are less wedded to the ideals of capitalism. For instance, some countries in the Eurozone tend to put more restrictions on the number of hours an employee can legally work each week. And Portuguese workers average about 1,980 hours of work annually, while German workers average about 1,648 hours. So, differences in labor costs are also substantial. For example, the hourly compensation costs of production workers range from $2.75 in Mexico to about $23.82 in United States to about $34.21 in Germany. And several European countries, including the UK and Germany, require substantial severance pay to departing employees. And usually this equals to at least 1 year service in Germany. And workers in France can expect 2.5 days of paid holiday per full month of service per year. And Germans get about 18 days vacation per year. Then we have the legal differences, and legal differences blindside even sophisticated companies. After spending billions expanding into Germany, Walmart discovered that Germany's commercial laws discourage ads based on price comparisons. And this is exactly what Walmart did in the US, but obviously the same method or the same thing cannot be replicated in Germany. So they soon had to leave Germany. And as other examples, the US practice of employment at will does not exist in Europe, where firing or laying off workers is usually expensive in Europe. Like I just mentioned a bit earlier, it takes about a year to actually fire somebody in Europe. And in many European countries, work councils replace the worker management medications typical in US firms. And work councils are formal, and they're employee selected groups of workers' representatives that meet monthly with managers to discuss topics ranging from no smoking policies to layoffs. Then we have something known as co-determination, and co-determination is the rule in Germany and several other countries, and it means employees have the legal right to a voice in setting company policies, and workers elect their own representatives to the supervisory board of the employer. And in the United States, by comparison, HR policies are on most matters, such as wages and benefits, are set by the employer or in negotiations with its labor unions. Now, managing globally also requires monitoring political risks, and political risks are any governmental actions or politically motivated events that could adversely affect the long run profitability or value of the firm. So, for example, the president of Venezuela moved to nationalize his country's oil industries. So that is obviously going to have some effect on companies who want to move to Venezuela or have already set up their companies in Venezuela, right? Then we move on to HR abroad. Basically, we'll take two examples, which is Europe and China, and we'll see how they're different from us and different from the rest of the world. So, over the past 2 decades, the separate countries of the former European community unified into a common market for goods, services, capital, and even labor, called the European Union. So, tariffs for goods moving across borders from one EU country to another generally disappeared, and employees are now more free to move between jobs in the UE countries. So basically, the introduction of a single currency, the euro, further blurred the differences. So companies doing business in Europe must adjust their human resource policies and practices to the European Union directives, as well as to country-specific employment laws. So, for example, let's take the minimum EU wages. So, most EU countries have minimum wage systems and some set national limits. So, others allow employers and unions to work out their own minimum wages, right? Working hours, EU sets the work week at 48 hours, but most EU countries set it at 40 hours a week. Employee or union representation. Employees have, or Europe has many levels of employee representation. In France, for instance, employers with 50 or more um, employees must consult with their employees' representatives on matters including work conditions, training, and profit sharing plans and layoffs. In Italy, all employers with 15 or more employees must consult with their work councils on internal work rules. Then we have termination of employment, and like I said, it could be quite difficult to terminate employees in the eurozone. So required notice periods when dismissing employees in Europe range from none in Spain to 2 months in Italy. Then we have China. Now, all employers in China deal with issues including relatively scarce employment services and an increasingly active union movement. However, how they deal with these issues depends on the ownership of the firm. State owned enterprises use fewer modern human resource management tools than do giant Chinese multinationals like Lenovo, for instance. So, when it comes to recruiting, because of governmental constraints on migration and other legal constraints, it is relatively difficult to recruit, hire, and retain good employees. At least until the downturn starting in 2008, where labor shortages were widespread and um, China's new employmental contract law requires, among many other things, that employers report the names, the sexes, the identification numbers, and contract terms for all employees they hire within 30 days of hiring to local labor bureaus. And in China, recruiting effectiveness depends largely on non recruitment HRM issues. And employees are highly career oriented and gravitate towards employers that provide the best career advancement, training, and opportunities. So, firms like Siemens China, with impressive training and development programs, have the least difficulty attracting good candidates. And poaching employees is a serious matter in China. The employer must verify that the applicant is free to sign a new employment agreement. When it comes to selection, the dominant employee selection method involves analyzing the applicant's resume and then interviewing him or her. And the ideal way to do this is to institute a structured interview process, as many of the foreign firms in China have done. Then we have the appraisal. The employee appraisal is particularly sensitive to the cultural realities in China, and the appraisal therefore needs to follow the formalities of saving face and avoiding confrontational tension producing situations. So, in general, it's best to talk in terms of objective work data as opposed to personal comments like you're too slow, right? Talk in terms of numbers, talk in terms of the data, talk in terms of last year's performance to this year's performance. Don't make it personal and try and avoid being confrontational when it comes to working in China. Then we have compensation. Although many managers endorse performance based pay in China, many employers, to preserve group harmony, make incentive pay a small part of the pay package. And as in other parts of Asia, team incentives are advisable. Then we have staffing the global organization. So, filling your company's jobs abroad has traditionally been the heart of international human resource management. And the process involves identifying and selecting the people who will fill the positions and then placing them in those positions. So, let's have a look at the different types of employees, right? So, locals are citizens of the countries where they are working, whereas expatriates are non citizens of the countries in which they are working. So, for example, an American working in France is an expat. Now, home country nationals are citizens of the country in which the multinational company has its headquarters. So, an American working for GM's subsidiary in China is a home country national, yeah, as well as an expat. And third country nationals are citizens of a country other than the parent or the host country. So, for example, a British executive working in Tokyo branch of a US multinational bank, he would be known as a third country national, and of course, an expat. So, expatriates still represent a minority of multinational managers, and locals fill most positions. Now, there are many reasons employers rely more on locals. Many people don't want to work in a foreign country, and the cost of using expatriates is usually far greater than the cost of using local workers. And in one survey, employers reported a 21% attrition rate for expatriate employees, compared with an average of 10% for their general employee populations. So, local people may view the multinational as a better citizen if it uses local management talent. Some governments even press for staffing with local management. There may also be a fear that expatriates, knowing they are at the foreign subsidiary for only a few years, may overemphasize on short term results. Yet, there are also reasons for using expatriates, either home country or third country nationals, for staffing subsidiaries. The main reason is usually that employers can't find local candidates that the required technical with the required technical qualifications. And multinationals have also viewed a successful stint abroad as a required step in developing top managers. So, for instance, after a term abroad, the head of General Electric's Asia Pacific region returned as vice chairman at GE. So, control is another important reason for using expatriates. The assumption here is that home country managers are already steeped in the firm's policies and cultures, and thus more likely to apply headquarters' way of doing things. Then we have other solutions, of course. Today, the choice is not just between expatriate versus local employees. There are other solutions as well. Some dub these short term, commuter, or frequent flyer assignments, and they involve much travel but no formal relocation. And other firms use internet based video technologies and group decision making software to enable global virtual teams to do business without either travel or relocation. And one survey found that about 78% of surveyed employees had some form of localization policy. And this is a policy of transferring a home country national employee to a foreign subsidiary as a permanent transferee. The employer here does not treat the employee as an expatriate, but instead as, say, a French local hire. Then we have offshoring. Offshoring is an important international staffing issue. And offshoring means having local employees abroad to do the jobs that the firm's employees previously did in house. And offshoring is also increasingly popular. Then we have the international staffing policy. We've seen that various factors like technical competence determines whether firms use, say, locals or expatriates abroad. But it's not just facts that influence such decisions. In addition, the top executives' values also play a role. And some executives are just more expat oriented. For example, some experts classify top executive values as the three types of values. One is the ethnocentric, then we have the polycentric, and a geocentric. So, ethnocentric practices, the prevailing attitude is that the home country attitudes, management style, knowledge evaluation criteria, and managers are superior to anything the host country might have to offer. And such values translate into particular employment practices. And with an ethnocentric staffing policy, the firm fills key management jobs with parent country nationals. So, for example, at the Royal Dutch Shell, for instance, financial officers around the world are often Dutch nationals. And reasons given for ethnocentric policies include lack of qualified host country's senior management talent. Then we have polycentric practices. In the polycentric corporation, there is a conscious belief that only host country managers can ever really understand the culture and behavior of the host country market, and therefore the foreign subsidiaries should be managed by local people. A polycentric oriented firm would staff its foreign subsidiaries with host country nationals and its home office with parent country nationals. And this may reduce the local cultural misunderstandings that might occur if it used expatriate managers. It will also almost undoubtedly be less expensive. Geocentric executives believe they must scout the firm's management staff on a global basis, and the assumption that the best manager for a specific position anywhere may be in any of the countries in which the firm operates. So, for example, if a company appointed a CEO, someone from Wales who run the firm's US operations, then that would be a geocentric practice. A geocentric staffing policy seeks the best people for key jobs throughout the organization, regardless of nationality. And this can let the global firm use its human resources more efficiently by transferring the best person to the open job, wherever he or she may be. So, such crossbreeding can also help build a stronger and more consistent culture and set of values among the entire global management team. Now, the processes that firms use to select managers for their domestic and foreign positions obviously have many similarities. And for either assignment, candidates need the technical knowledge and skills to do the job, and the intelligence and people skills to be successful managers. So, testing, interviewing, and background checks are as applicable for selecting expatriates as for domestic assignments. However, foreign assignments are different. For example, there is a stress that being alone in a foreign land can put on the single manager, and if spouse and children will share the assignment, there are the pressures that the family will have to confront abroad. And furthermore, it's not just how different culturally the host country is from the person's home country, but rather the person's adaptability is important. And some people adapt anywhere, others fail to adapt anywhere. And selecting managers for assignments abroad therefore means testing them for traits that predict success in working abroad. So, one study asked about 338 international assignees from various countries to specify which traits are important for the success in a foreign assignment. And the researchers identified 5 factors, and these were job knowledge and motivation, relational skills, flexibility or adaptability, and extracultural openness, and of course, the family situation, that is, the spouse's positive opinion and willingness of spouse to live abroad, and so on. So, family situation was generally found to be the most important factor, and a finding consistent with other research on international assignments and transfers. And a recent review of the research reported strong support for the importance of factors like interpersonal skills and family adjustment for expatriate adjustment. Now, how do we make expatriate assignments successful? So many employers post expatriates abroad, but it's disconcerting to see how often such assignments fail. And knowing how to make a successful assignment is an important management skill. Start by systemizing your expatriate process. Make sure there's an expatriate policy covering matters such as compensation, transfer costs. Therefore, before selecting someone to send abroad, understand where the main potential problem lies. So, we've seen that having the right personality is one issue. So, for example, in the study of 143 expatriate employees, extroverted, agreeable, and emotionally stable individuals were less likely to leave early. Furthermore, the person's intentions are important. People who want expatriate careers try harder to adjust to them. And similarly, expatriates who are more satisfied with their jobs are more likely to adapt to the foreign assignment. And some people are also culturally at ease that they do find transfer anywhere, whereas others will fail anywhere. When it comes to family pressures, non-work factors like these loom large in expatriate failures. And one study, U.S. managers listed in descending order of importance for leaving early. One is the inability of the spouse to adjust, the manager's inability to adjust, and other family problems. And managers' personal or emotional immaturity and inability to cope with larger overseas responsibilities. So, one study identified three things that helped make it easier for the spouse to adjust. First is language fluency, since spouses will feel even more cut off if they can't make themselves understood. Second is having preschool age children rather than school age children or no children seem to make it easier for the spouse to adjust. And this suggests that younger children, perhaps because of their increased dependency, help spouses retain that part of their social identities as parents, and their responsibilities for these children remain the same. Third, it helps that there be a strong bond of closeness between the spouse and the partner. And this provides the continuing emotional and social support many spouses find lacking abroad. Um, then we have something known as the adaptability screening, which can be done before they go abroad. So, with this, often it is conducted by a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and this adaptability screening aims to assess the assignees and spouses' probable success in handling the foreign transfer and to alert them to issues. So, here the experience is often the best predictor of future success. So, companies like Colgate Palmolive therefore look for overseas candidates whose work and non experience, education, and language skills already demonstrate a commitment to and facility for living and working with different cultures. And even several summers traveling overseas on participating in foreign student programs might provide some basis to believe that the potential transferee can adjust when he or she arrives overseas. So, employers can do several things to boost the odds that assignments abroad will go smoothly. One is providing realistic previews of what to expect and carefully screening expat and spouse, improved orientation, and improved benefits package are obvious solutions. Another is simply to shorten the length of the assignment, and person job match is also important. Insofar as expatriates who are more satisfied with their jobs are more likely to adapt to the foreign assignment. And helping spouses get jobs abroad and providing more support to the expat and his or her family are also important. So, some employers set up global buddy programs, and here local managers mentor new expatriates. Then we have um, training and maintaining expatriate employees. So, after deciding who you'll send abroad, attention turns to providing the person with the training, pay, and other support he or she needs to be successful. So, orienting and training employees on an international assignment. When it comes to this, um, this is very important for success overseas, and the practices of most US employers reflect more talk than substance, and executives tend to agree that international assignees do best when they receive the special training in things like language and culture that they require. And however, few companies actually provide such training, which is not a good sign. So pre-departure training, what sort of special training do overseas candidates need? Uh, One firm specializing is in such programs prescribes a four-step approach. One is the level 1 training. This training focuses on the impact of cultural differences and on raising trainees' awareness of such differences and their impact on business outcomes. The level 2 aims at getting participants to understand how attitudes, both negative and positive, form and how they influence behavior. So, for example, unfavorable stereotypes may subconsciously influence how a new manager responds to his or her new foreign subordinates. Level 3 training provides factual knowledge about the target country, and level 4 provides skills in areas like language and adjustment and adaptation skills. Then, of course, ongoing training. Beyond such pre departure training, more firms are providing continuing in country cross cultural training during the early stages of an overseas assignment. So, this is as important as the pre departure training. So, for example, after settling in, managers abroad continue to need traditional skills oriented development. And at many firms, including IBM, such development includes rotating assignments to help overseas managers grow professionally. Now, the next part of this is compensating its expatriates. The whole area of international compensation presents some tricky problems. On the one hand, there is logic in maintaining company wide pay scales and policies so that, for instance, you pay divisional marketing directors throughout the world within the same range, and this reduces the risk of perceived inequalities and dramatically simplifies the job of keeping track of disparate country by country wage rates. Yet, not adapting pay scales to local markets will produce more problems than it solves. So, the fact is, it can be enormously more expensive to live in some countries like Japan than others like India. And if these cost of living differences aren't considered, it will be almost impossible to get managers to take high cost assignments. So let's look at one of the approaches, which is the balance sheet approach. And the most common approach to formulating expatriate pay is to equalize purchasing power across countries, a technique known as the balance sheet approach. And more than 85% of North American companies reportedly use this approach. The basic idea is that each expatriate should enjoy the same standard of living he or she would have had at home. And the balance sheet approach focuses on four groups of expenses: income taxes, housing, goods and services, and discretionary expenses like child support, car payments, and the like. And the employer estimates that what each of these four expenses is in the expatriate's home country and what each will be in the host country. And the employer then pays any differences such as additional income taxes or housing expenses. So, for example, the base salary will normally be in the same range as the manager's home country salary. And in addition, however, there might be an overseas or foreign service premium, and the executive receives this as a percentage of his or her base salary, in part to compensate for the cultural and physical adjustments he or she will have to make. There may also be several allowances, including a housing allowance and an education allowance for the expatriate's children. And to help the expatriate manage his or her home and foreign financial obligations, most employers use a split pay approach. They pay, say, half a person's actual pay in home country currency and half in the local currency. Then we have incentives. Employers use two types of incentives in international compensation. First, as mentioned, employers pay various incentives to encourage the employee to take the job abroad. For example, foreign service premiums as are financial payments over and above regular base pay. And these typically range from 10 to 30% of base pay and appear as weekly or monthly salary supplements. Then we have the hardship allowances, which compensate expatriates for hard living and working conditions at certain foreign locations. So, for example, US diplomats posted to Iraq receive about 70% boost in base salary, among other incentives. And then we have mobility premiums that are typically lump sum payments to reward employees for moving from one assignment to another. Then, how do you establish a global pay system? There are basically 5 steps, right? Balancing global consistency in compensation with local consideration, of course, starts with establishing a rewards program that makes sense in terms of the employer's strategic needs. And the first step is to back and ask how you want each pay component to help achieve the company's strategic goals. So basically, have a global philosophy framework. Then you identify any gaps. So review your existing rewards programs around the world. And the question here is, to what extent do our pay plans around the world support our strategic aims? And systemize these pay systems. These job descriptions and performance expectations around the world. Systemizing them, for example, creating more consistent performance assessment practices, and establish consistent job requirements and performance expectations for similar jobs worldwide. And then adapt the pay policies. So review your global pay policies for setting salary levels, incentives, and so forth, and then conduct surveys and analysis to assess local pay practices. Then fine-tune the firm's global pay policies so they make sense for each location. And finally, have an ongoing program assessment. So periodically reevaluate the global pay policies given your firm's strategic needs and the competitors' pay practices, right? So this brings us to the end of this chapter. I'd like to thank you all for being part of this session, and I hope you've enjoyed the human resources management subject. Please do log in whenever you feel the need to understand some of the concepts. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the final chapter of the subject, and thank you once again. Have a good day.